We're going to take a look at Bryan comps once again. And when you're in these types of comps and you find that there's not enough data, how do you expand the area or contract the area? We're going to take a look at that. Quick recap, hopefully you understand this at this point. What is a Bryan comp? They're not style-based. They don't determine based on it. Not a ranch with a ranch, a two-story with a two-story. We will mix ranches and two stories, and you'll see that the concept works. However, you still have the choice to only use ranches with ranches and two stories with two stories. Those are style-based comps. And here, Bryan comps are dependent upon three criteria. They were brought in the following situations. Same radius as the subject, same year as the subject or approximate time, and about the same dollar amount as the subject. And then they now have re-entered the marketplace. They may have been a sold, they could be active, it could have been a failed listing or under contract. So let's go ahead and take a look at this report. Okay, so we have ourselves at this point 16 closed properties. Go back up to the top, and these were all purchased within 12 months of the subject property's purchase date back in 1999. So that was a year before this date and a year after that date. And that's where we get all of our sold properties here. But let's say you want to do a shorter period of time. You only want to do within 3 months of their purchase date. Now we've reduced our amount of properties to just 4. Now our projected value with those 3 properties that are checked from earlier puts the value around $398,000. Our other search showed the value to be in the mid $380 something thousand. So even with this little bit of data, we're in the ballpark. Remember, our seller in this case was asking $415,000. The software projected to be in the 380s or so. They're now pending when they dropped the price to $405. So they most likely got in the 380s, maybe the low 390s. Again, the software projected that value sight unseen to begin with. So what we've done is we've gone only 3 months out. The seller bought in 1999. You can see how tight a time frame that is. I don't think that's necessary that you would do a search with that short of time frame around the subject property's original purchase date. We allow you to go, actually, the maximum time is a year out. A year before, a year after. And in some cases you get way too much data, which is a nice problem to have. But I think the 16 comps are adequate to choose from because, again, we projected our value by checking the records we looked at before in that 380 something value. If I recheck some of these records, you'll see that the property value we projected to be in that mid 380 something thousand dollars. All right. So again, what we've done, looked at radius, looked at time bought, and most people are saying we should only look at comps that are within half a mile of the subject property. That's how we do traditional style-based comps. However, Bryan comps are looking more at the economy, not the local area. Now, we've only gone 3 miles away. We found 16 properties. Let's drop it all the way back to a quarter mile. You're going to see here we actually have no solds now that were within a quarter mile of the subject property. Let's go to the traditional half mile that appraisers like to use for economy-based comps. Ooh, we only have 1 property. It's projected the value to be $401,892. 1 property, 1 Bryan comp is not sufficient, but it's amazing. We're at least in the ballpark because the seller was asking $415. So I'd suggest we look out, well, we default for you 3 miles out, but on occasion you're in a city area or some radius like that, and you need to be in just a much tighter area. Remember, by looking at the addresses and things like that, you always have the opportunity to not include the property in your search. because you say it's too far away from the subject property. Now again, we're at $380,000 value by taking our only two Bryan comps. I suggest again we need more than that to really have a scientific approach to this to tell the sellers that the software's coming with a value based on one or two properties. It's not really enough data, but it's really amazing. We're still in that ballpark. And these comps also might not have come up as the comps you wanted to use because they weren't in the seller subdivision. They were within a half mile or 3/4 of a mile away. So let's take it out 2 miles just to see what you get here. Hopefully you're getting the idea. Radius is not as important. In fact, we're going to go ahead and take this thing out just for the fun of it. 10 miles from the subject property. What I want to show you at this point is a pattern. You might say, Bryan, that's ridiculous going out 10 miles. So let's find those properties. Here's one that's 8 miles away. Okay. Now we have somebody who gained 10% per year. This obviously they bought it for $260 in '99. This is a home that was built new construction property. How do we know that? Let's go ahead and click on it, and you can see this gorgeous home with photographs in it. This is far superior to the subject property that we're looking at, and also you can see it's a new home that was built around that time. So that's, again, whenever we see somebody getting a really wild rate of return, there's usually a story behind it. My point being that even when we look 6 miles away, the rates of return we're seeing in the marketplace, are similar. And let's go further down. Again, go miles away from the subject property, and you can see, again, people getting 2%, 1%, 1%, 1% per year. We're going to skip over this one because it's also, it went from 300,000 to 1.4 million. This obviously was ground acquisition, but the software is picking up people who bought for around the same price, in the same area, around the same date, and in this case it picked up ground, and those people got almost 12% growth rate because they built a home. But we can see here the appreciation rate did not matter so much on the location. It had to do a lot with the economy. When people bought, where they bought, really had a lot to determine. Look at this, very consistent rate of return. Same with the property. Again, these are 5 miles away. It has to do with you bought around the same date for about the same price, and you held it for about the same time, and you're going to get a certain kind of rate of return. And I've had agents say, you just can't go 10 miles out. You'd be amazed when you start studying these Bryan comps, this concept of what the rate of return is based on when you purchased the property. So I've had agents use 10-mile radius from the subject property. It would seem like it makes no sense because we've not used Bryan comps ever before. All we're looking, though, was money in the economy when people made an investment in a home. All right, hopefully this helped you find additional properties when you're doing a report and you're not getting enough solds. Go ahead, go out further geographically. I'll do one more thing before we move on from this, and that is also what we've just done. This report shows us Bryan comps that are active, current listings, that are 5 miles out. And you can see, you can look at the rates of return. Very consistent attempted rates of return. And these properties are miles and miles away from the subject property. Why are they the same? It's because they bought around the same date for the same price in the same area. Thus, they're getting the same rate of return, very consistent in here. And then the failed listings, which are fantastic to look at to prove to a seller what you can't do. So we look at the distance on the failed property, 6 miles away. Look at the rates of return. Very consistent. Again, this one went from 200,000 to 900,000. Clearly, it was new construction. The rates of return And these properties, these are the ones that failed, all asking around the same number, right? Nobody in here is asking like 7% or 8%, except if it was crazy new construction or a house was flipped. And then lastly, our properties under contract. Look at how far they are away from the subject property, 8 miles. But look at the rates of return. Very consistent. People like this, when you click on the record, many times it's going to say there's a lot more capital improvements than anybody else did. All right? So the radius search we give you in this report goes up to 10 miles. We recommend you leave it the default at 3 miles, but it'll always give you more Bryan type cuts. Okay, thanks for watching.